Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Every Rocky Ever, a Colorado Rockies podcast, part of the Rocky Mountain Rooftop Network, part of Fans First Sports Network, dedicated to celebrating Rockies history. And normally this show is all about celebrating players, but we're shifting away from that in this one for a special one, very impactful one. I'm your host, Skyler Timmons, joined here always by my lifetime Rockies fan. It's my brother, Dustin Timmons.
Hello, hello.
Howdy, howdy. So, like we were saying, we usually focus on players. That's the main focus of this one. But when it comes to the Rockies, it goes beyond the players that can be considered under the Every Rocky Ever, right, Dustin?
Oh yeah, for sure. And so we went this route with the manager because the first manager. Really for me, the first coach that I think of when I think about the Rockies, he's the one that I grew up with seeing, and it's one that I wish I knew more about his story before, because it was all after that I realized what an amazing career and life in baseball this guy had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're talking about the Rockies' very first manager, Mr. Don Baylor himself, Groove as he was called, and during his playing days. And before we get into his breakdown, I was in that same boat, Dustin, because he was kind of well before my time. And yeah, he was a hitting coach a couple of years. That's when I remembered hearing the name, like, oh, Don Baylor used to manage. Oh, now he's the hitting coach for a couple of years. But I didn't really understand his life story and his playing career, and as well as his coaching career and the impact he had wherever he went, until I wrote a 3-part article series for Purple Row in 2022. Was it 2022 or no? It was 2023. Time flies. Early last year is for February for Black History Month. That's who better to talk about than an influential individual than Don Baylor in team history. And we're kicking around other player ideas, which we'll get to in other episodes, but figured Don Baylor, he deserves an episode all his own, just like that article series.
Yeah, that's with Don Baylor, and I, when you brought this up, I was like, oh yeah, we can pretty much just read your article from last year on the Purple Row, because it was cool because it broke down his whole career, his youth going to high school, to college, where he was just an amazing athlete, getting into the majors and going through those struggles that he had, in the minors or as a young major leaguer, and that playing career, and then the manager part, the coaching Don Baylor, that I think had a huge impact on a lot of big name players and with the teams that he was involved with. And I think he's a really good one, because as you said, for this month, Black History Month, and I think it was, all those things factored into, hey, let's talk about Don Baylor.
Yeah, it's a really influential stuff, and he impacted a ton of teams, not just the Rockies, and we'll probably focus more on the Rockies and his legacy there, but he had his hands in that Rockies history even before he suited up in purple, which is pretty interesting, with some cool little interactions that he had to help mold the team identity, especially in those early days. But might as well hop right into it, and Dustin's got his entire playing career stats and some of those managerial things, so take it away.
All right. Don Baylor, who pretty much was a designated hitter, but also played left field, a little first base, and batted right, threw right, from Austin, Texas. And he started his baseball career being drafted by the Orioles in the second round of the 1967 amateur draft, and that was out of high school, and he made his major league debut in 1970, and so he played for several teams in his careers, with Baltimore, with Oakland, the Angels, the Yankees, the Red Sox, and the Twins, and finished out his career in Oakland. Now, one of the cool things about him is, he was an All-Star, World Series champion, a Silver Slugger, and he had an MVP in there, didn't he?
Yeah, I believe it was with the Angels.
Yeah, that's in 1979,
Mm-hmm.
and that going through that, I was like, wait, what?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was pretty legit. I always just remember him being like the hit by pitch all-time leader.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I always thought of. But he had a lengthy 19 years in the big leagues.
Mm-hmm.
And had plenty of postseason experience with Baltimore and the Angels, in Boston and Minnesota, and everywhere he went, it was, hey, get on our team and help us in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was really cool to see about Don Baylor. And then we flip to his managerial career, and he started with the Rockies in the 1993 season and was with them till the 1998 season. And then he went on to manage the Cubs for 3 years. And then he went into a lot of bench coach, hitting coach positions in his career, and making a trip back to Colorado in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
But that was his quick roundup. It was interesting because it's kind of weird. He never played for the Rockies, and so looking at his, I never knew he played for the Orioles. I remember thinking of him as California Angel. I think that's where any pictures or things that I saw was that, and I think that goes along with the fact that he was an MVP one year.
Yeah. Then ultimately, in his Rockies uniform, managed 909 games. I did find the stat you can find on Baseball Reference: 10 ejections for Don Baylor as a manager. Had a win-loss record of 440 wins to 469 losses. One postseason appearance, they went 1-3. He was the 1995 National League Manager of the Year. We'll get into that. And then as a hitting coach, 2009, 2010. This is another one we'll get into. The hitting stats. This is what the team did underneath him. 262 average, 340 on base, 433 slugging. They averaged 4.86 runs per game. They had 2,860 hits, 363 home runs, and 1,501 RBIs in his 2 years as their hitting coach. So he knew what he's doing.
Yeah, I wish we could get those kind of stats nowadays.
Yeah, but I'm trying to figure out where exactly can we start when we're talking about Don Baylor. And I think the big thing maybe is to touch a little bit more on before he even gets to the Rockies, and what kind of molded him throughout his life leading up to it. And some that I found in that research, he grew up in that rough time in the in the 60s, where for a lot of racism, and that's how for a lot of racism, and dealing with that in Texas, where he was part of, I think, a first group of when integration starts to happen in the schools. He's part of that first wave and starts getting integrated into the sports teams, where initially they only had a couple of spots for the black kid players, a couple of them, but ultimately he pretty much forces his way onto the onto these teams and excels in football and basketball and baseball especially, which I think was his big sport that he really loved, because he dealt with a lot of injuries that kind of hindered that football career. Where I think he had a scholarship, Dustin, to University of Texas that would have made him the first black player in school history. He's like, no, I think my future's in baseball. And so he gets drafted by the Orioles instead of going on this other alternate path where he goes on to play football and who knows what happens.
Yeah, and I think he made the right move for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that resilience in Don Baylor and going through that and rising above, and I know for sure that was not easy
Mm-hmm.
thing to do at that time, and it's hard to imagine. How would it be going out there, even though he produced as a high school kid? Like, what else was he going on? What else was he dealing with? Do that.
Yeah.
During the school day and getting out there to the ball field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he said in an article on MLB.com once, there were times that it wasn't real pleasant. I got into a few fisticuffs, but I made a lot of friends. It was harder in baseball because I could hear the things people were yelling. It was harder to hear while playing football and basketball. But there were some towns around Austin that weren't real fun trips. But the thing I noticed in a lot of research on him is and we talk about that resilience, and that's something that you and I can't ever relate to or fully understand. We're as pale as they come. But Don Baylor having to go through this, but I think the big thing is he was able to not let it bring him down. He was able to continue to rise above it and not let it weigh him down. And I think this is something I notice is in a sentence that I wrote. It says, Baylor never forgot the racial slurs, taunts, and fights, but he never let his own pride consume him into a gall of bitterness at the ignorance of those times. In fact, he would laugh at it. He wasn't going to let those things get in the way of what he wanted to accomplish in his life. And I think that kind of just encapsulates just the way he carried himself as a man and as an individual during those times and throughout his life. He was one tough dude.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it makes me think of the movie 42 with Jackie Robinson, and even in that, I was like, man, some of those scenes that makes me super uncomfortable. Is I can't imagine what actually being there, and the things like he says that, especially in the high school school field, you got parents right up against the fence, right up next to the dugout, and in those times, nobody would say anything, stop anyone, and it you imagine, but then luckily gets drafted by the Orioles. There's a way out. This is a path not only that opens up the door maybe to help provide for him and his own family, but a way to get out and see the world, the different parts of the country, and gets drafted by the Orioles. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool story. His beginning there in baseball,
and then he goes through his minor league career, and there's a lot of growing there before he eventually makes his debut. But going through that adversity of the game, of being humbled and having to figure out how to hit and everything, and he goes to Puerto Rico, I think in 1970, after the 1970 season, and his manager there was famed Orioles player Frank Robinson, who was the manager there, and I don't know what he's doing. He was still playing baseball, so I guess he's part-time managing down in Puerto Rico. But
wild times.
Yeah, crazy times back then. But that begins a blossoming of a friendship and a mentorship with Frank Robinson, which then you can look at how Frank Robinson posed himself, played the game. You can see those influences on Don Baylor throughout his life and his career, where it may not have been like a Hall of Fame career, but it was one of those things we talked about. He's a Hall of Fame person with Don Baylor, and that friendship, mentorship just carried him throughout his life. And influenced a lot of the ways he coached, the way he played. I think him being with Frank Robinson early on in his career set the stage for everything else when he got his opportunities.
Yeah, and we can't slouch on his even his playing stats. He was an MVP. He batted was it 260 for his career. Not bad. hit a hit a baseball to play in the majors for 19 seasons. Well, it's more like 17. His first couple of years, just barely a handful of games. But he 366 doubles. He had 2,000 hits and 338 home runs, 1,200 RBI. One that sticks out for me: 185 stolen bases.
Yeah, sneaky fast.
He had 52 steals in 1976.
Yeah.
He's
it's kind of along those lines of kind of like a five-tool player. Like he had those bits and pieces throughout his career. Maybe they didn't all hit at the same time, but he had those elements in him.
And here's the biggest stat, and the one, like I said before, that I remember Don Baylor about. He was hit by a pitch 267 times. Oh man, it's like it's a good thing. And add in another 5. Let's see, 5 from the playoffs. But guy was a tank.
Yeah.
Crowded the plate. Wasn't afraid to I'd like to see, like, probably those interviews and stuff with him. Like, what was his mentality at the plate? After getting hit that many, leading the league in hit by pitch every season, like, he had nerves of steel.
Yeah. He led the league in hit by pitches 8 times in his career. So almost half that career, he led the league.
That's the days that they didn't even have the protective arm cover and all that body armor they have nowadays.
Yeah, look at it too. I think the big thing is like he just had impeccable plate discipline and aggressive. Like, this is my plate. Ownership over it. Where he struck out. He didn't strike out a ton. I think he was another one of those, had more walks than strikeouts in his career. I had the stat here. Yeah, he struck out. Oh, it was a close one. He struck out 1,069 times and walked 805 times. So a pretty small margin, like 200 walks difference. He was fearless, hustling player that was fearless on the base paths and in the batter's box. So wherever he went, he was respected around the game, I think. In clubhouses, like you mentioned before, like teams wanted him. Like if they had a chance to make a run, well, we want Don Baylor. He's going to help us. And that's what the Twins did that led them to a World Series. And yeah, throughout his career, that he was, as he got older too, he started to turn into that, I'm the clubhouse leader. I'm going to get on guys. I'm going to police things, and commanded the respect of his peers. And that's what you do when you play 19 years and a big performance wherever you went.
And I think those little things is, I wonder how many former coaches or former teammates already saw during his playing days the makings of a major league manager. Because Don Baylor, before he became the Rockies manager, had no coaching experience, no managing.
Yeah,
experience.
Not managing. He was the hitting coach in Milwaukee from 1990 and 1991, and then the hitting coach for the Cardinals in 1992. And he had been interviewing for managerial positions and just not materializing for anywhere. And until the Rockies came calling in 1993. Prior to that, but even then in Milwaukee and St. Louis, making huge impacts. And this is where we can now start to get into the bulk of this where he's actually with the Rockies. But one of the big ones with the Brewers, one guy that was there, a young outfielder that was had potential, but he just wasn't getting that full playing time commitment from the Brewers. Ended up coming over to the Rockies in 1993 as a big bashing outfielder. One Dante Bichette, who was they crossed paths there, and I think the one story that I love is from Manny Randhawa's book about the Blake Street Bombers, where they're hanging out I think they're in Boston, and Dante goes over to the gym right next to Fenway to go work out or do something, and he sees a girl there that he's like, oh, she's pretty cute, but he's too scared to talk to her, which is funny to think with Dante Bichette. But he comes back and he tells Don Baylor, tells him about this experience, and Don Baylor made him go back to that gym and talk to her, ask her out, and they eventually got married in 1993, and I believe they're still married today. But
thanks, Groove.
Yeah, smooth. Now what you gotta do? But another one. This is what Dante recalls. It says Don Baylor pulled me aside one day when we were in Milwaukee, and he said to me, "You don't realize how good you are. When you figure this thing out, you're going to run this league. You're going to be the best player in this league." And to which Bichette later recalls, "God bless him, I owe Don Baylor a lot. He was put into my life for a reason." And another of those instances, a coach and a friend, seeing potential in somebody, and then able to pull that out of one of his players.
Yeah, that's because once Dante Bichette gets to Colorado, especially 1995, he's one of the all-time Rockies, offensively.
Yeah.
But having a coach, Don Baylor, and that was cool, is that he had some connections to some of these original Rockies before the team was made or anything. And as he gets put in as manager, gets in some guys that he knew about that maybe were under the radar, and was able to get that potential out of them, to max them out under his mentorship.
Yeah, I think it was Don Baylor was one of those first ones, or Dante was one of those first ones. Like Don Baylor's like, "Oh, we need to get this guy. He's going to do a lot of good for our team." And I think what was nice with that connection is even more connections. Bob Gebhard, Rocky's GM at the time, had actually been involved, was with the Minnesota Twins, and was part of that trade, those talks to bring Don Baylor over to the Twins on the way to their World Series win. So there was already that connection there. Brings him over, and then Dante brings that expertise, that experience of other players to bring into the fold. Crazy stuff.
Well, thank goodness he did.
Yeah.
But out of the articles I read, that they said they started out with a list of 12 candidates and brought in the top 4 for interviews. After all that, they were like, "Nah, Don Baylor's our guy."
Yeah. Like what Bob Gebhard said after the hiring, despite Baylor's lack of managing, because this was his first, he was bringing in a brand new manager for a brand new team. Like, what are they doing? This guy doesn't have any managing experience. To which Bob Gebhard said, "I'm willing to roll the dice because I know the man." And I think that was big thing, and I think that was big thing for a ton of people, is they knew who he was as a person and as a player, the command he could respect, and that's what a lot of these other quotes from guys. Bob Watson was the assistant GM of the Astros at the time and his former hitting coach in Oakland. "I tip my hat to Bob Gebhard for giving him the opportunity. I had a chance to work with Don in Oakland and felt he was on his way to becoming a general manager or club president." So you mentioned earlier, like, did they already get hints of that? Like, yes, his hitting coach got that hint from him in Oakland. But he added on, I don't think there will be pressure to win as much as to develop young players, and I think Don will do that. He commands respect. Not a bad quote. Former second baseman Bobby Grich, who was a teammate of Don Baylor's with the Angels and Orioles, and was one of his closest friends, said he had wanted to manage for a long time. He had the opportunity to play under a lot of different managers with a lot of different styles, and I'm sure that helped him develop a style of his own. Described him as a man of quiet strength who is fair, tough, and aggressive. Also said he treats everyone the same, from the clubhouse kid to the superstar. He has no nonsense approach. If the situation called for extra batting practice, he was there. If the situation called for extra work of any kind, he was there. I think he'll demand that of his players and get it. Trying to look for some other ones. Yeah, those were some of the main ones that I had found. Just a lot of people praising the move, like, yeah, this just makes sense. It just makes sense to hire Don Baylor. Like, he's the perfect man for the job. Just because he commands respect, he'll get the most out of whatever he's given.
Well, I think that's cool. Is a brand new team starting, out of nothing and having that opportunity. I'm sure there's people that wanted some seasoned veteran manager to come in and it's really crazy when these expansion teams come about, everybody's new. You might have a couple guys that and the whole thing about it, the expansion draft that you get selected to put on this team, and they just put it all together. He had, is a pretty, looking at the coaches that were with him. He had Don Zimmer, who had been in baseball for a bazillion years, and these other older baseball.
Yeah.
These guys that have been in baseball for a while, and even looking at them, I'm like, how did they put these guys together?
Ken Griffey Sr.'s here?
Yeah, it's just those like weird things. Is like, all right, cool. But I can just imagine the transition from playing days and being a bench coach or a hitting coach is totally different than the head guy. And now you're in front of the media every day and trying to get to know all these brand new players and all these guys, putting them together. But that first season, playing at Mile High and there's 80,000 people and it's just bumping because baseball's in Denver. And then we get and did they have the best of year that year?
No.
Not quite.
Yeah.
A little rough.
Yeah. They were a pretty common thing that we're used to now is they were projected to lose 100 games. But Don Baylor, being the competitive individual he was, says, my goal is to teach them how to win and how the game should be played. People say we're going to lose 100 games. It's not my competitive spirit to simply accept that. They avoided 100 losses that year and managed to do so until 2023. So they were on a good 30 streak run before they lost 100 games.
But looking at his stats as a manager, the first year was rough, but then the 1994 strike-filled season, they still won 53 games. They're 53-64, and so they were hovering, kind of close, trying to get up there to 500, and then 1995 is when it all clicked. And he wins Manager of the Year. The Rockies become the fastest expansion team to make it to the playoffs. And then we have 2 straight seasons of 83 wins where they were, that was good Rockies baseball. If they had a little more pitching, they, could have made it into the playoffs and done things, made some more noise. And then 1998, still 77 wins, 85 losses. They were hovering close to 500. And then they decide to part ways, and the Rockies go through a very hard time of finding successful managing.
Yeah. And I think that was I think Don Baylor represents that initial old school baseball approach the Rockies were going to try to take, where it's okay, we got to get veteran free agents and signings. Who cares about our farm system? We need to build a team to win now because we're getting all this attendance. We can't, we can't fail these people that are coming and supporting us. These fans have been great. We need to win something for them. And it is probably part of that competitive spirit that Don Baylor brought to the table, where he's like, yeah, we want to win now. That's the goal, and play the game right and learn, but we want to win now. And I think a big part of that is that influence on the players, even the established ones. Andres Galarraga was one of the first ones he reached out to bring to the team because he was his hitting coach in St. Louis, finds him crying under the bleachers at Busch Stadium and pulls him aside and Galarraga was finally ready to listen to some advice, opens up his stance. The rest is history for Andres Galarraga. But following that 1995 season, Dante Bichette turned down a 3-year, $10 million contract from the Rockies and was contemplating a deal to Japan at some point. And he figured he was done when the Rockies signed, or it was after 1994. And he was figuring after they signed Larry Walker, he was almost about to leave. He's like, oh, they signed Larry Walker. I guess I'm out of here. But it was Don Baylor that personally called him. And he said, the only reason I signed back with the Rockies right there was because Don Baylor called me personally. I owed him because he gave me an opportunity to play. First of all, there was no way I wasn't going to play for him when he called. So, and then what does Bichette go on to do in that 1995 season? Finishes second.
Monster season.
Finishes second in MVP voting, 664 slugging, 340 average, 40 homers, 128 RBIs. If not for his defense, probably would have won MVP. But all because Don Baylor called him up man, we need you. Don't leave.
Yeah, for sure. And that was looking back at those Blake Street Bomber days with all those guys and Baylor as the manager. It was pretty much just like having, they had a hitting coach. They also had Don Baylor.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it, everywhere that he went, teams hit.
Mm-hmm.
And found ways to hit, which is awesome. It's like I said, when Don Baylor was around, you didn't have to worry about your team not scoring runs.
Yeah.
Not getting on base.
Just had to worry about his team giving up a ton of runs.
Yes. But that's totally out of his control. But, that's when we talk about, like I said before, when I think of the Rockies and I think of the managers, Don Baylor always comes up first for me. An intense looking guy, but with a huge smile. I love seeing those pictures and him being there, with those early Rockies uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he was certainly the right guy to bring an expansion team together. Bob Gebhardt said he laid the groundwork of what professional baseball needed to be in Denver, and his impact still resonates with that franchise today. And I think that's the biggest thing. They tried to keep him around after relieving him of his duties after 1998. Wanted to keep him in the front office as like a club vice president. But he's like, no, I want to keep coaching. And so he goes, helps out the Atlanta Braves, helps some guy named Chipper Jones turn into an MVP candidate, goes over to Chicago and helps them out a bunch, all kinds of stuff. But he said everywhere he went, success of some kind followed. And, more than deserving of that 95 Manager of the Year award. First Rocky to win that. I think everywhere he went, the success followed just because of who he was as a person, his mentality when it came to playing baseball. Aggressive and fearless. And agree with Bob Haber. That's the foundation the Rockies need. Is don't be afraid. No, to heck with the altitude. Don't be afraid of it. Got to have that strong mentality.
Oh yeah, and he stayed in baseball after the Rockies, and that's what I remember. I remember when he was released, when he was fired after the '98 season, and it just felt like, well, okay, well, time to move on. It felt like the Rockies, they just couldn't get over the hump or back over, and even though they had some superstars, and it was we had Larry Walker doing his thing, and we had Todd Helton just come up, and it just wasn't enough. There, like you said, time and time again, just the pitching wasn't there, and the Rockies felt they needed to go in a different direction managerially, and it was rough. But Don Baylor staying in baseball from the Rockies, he goes to Atlanta. Like you said, helps out Chipper Jones. He goes over to the Mets for a couple of seasons, goes to the Mariners for another year. Then he comes back to the Rockies as a hitting coach and get things back on track. And then he goes to the Diamondbacks,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not too fond of. And then he goes to the Angels and finishes out, retires there in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
But
And he was a TV analyst for the Nationals in there too for 2007.
yeah, and so man, that guy was he was a major league lifer.
Mm.
You imagine just everything that he was able to do and see, and the players that he worked with throughout his career. It's pretty amazing. But we talk about memories, and the one that I'm like, another memory that I think of Don Baylor, bless his heart, when he's ready to catch a warm-up pitch. When he's with the Angels?
Yeah, he's catching the ceremonial first pitch with the Angels from Vladimir Guerrero.
Oh, no. No.
And breaks his leg.
Oh, no.
Yeesh.
And he still tried to walk it off.
Yeah. That's the toughness of Don Baylor.
Yeesh. Man, that is one that I look and I'm like, Don. But that's why if anybody's like, catch the ceremonial first pitch, I'm good. Unless it's like a super old lady that's gonna underarm it, but
yeah. Yeah. Speaking of memories, we reached out to people on Twitter, and there was a couple of little memories some people shared. Former Rockie, Danny Schaefer, and the initial post said Groove was awesome to play for. The man had his players' backs, which even just through research and studying of him, pretty easy to believe that. But some others, Owen Seaton says he got rid of the black alternate jerseys the first season after they lost the first few times they wore them. I have Don's black jersey from that first season. Yeah, people forget that the Rockies had like a regular black sleeves jersey before the vests. And hey, I wouldn't mind that one coming back.
Bring them back. Bring them back.
If you don't want your vests anymore, bring back the black alternates. The Mets did it. But
with purple pinstripes.
Ooh. But Nate Rocktober 19 over on Twitter, always interacting with stuff on there. He said, first MLB game I ever attended was the Rockies' inaugural season at Old Mile High versus the Giants. Baylor must have been miffed at something that transpired the previous game, because when he came out with the lineup card, he started giving them an earful. He was soon tossed and then proceeded to belly bump the umpire down the entire third base line. Pretty sure the game started in a delay. Barry Bonds parked 3 homers. After the game, I, of 8 years old, asked my dad what the umpire said to Baylor when he was yelling, to which 6-year-old brother sarcastically replied, "Probably have a nice night, go away." Probably not his proudest moment, but it is my first thought of him, and probably is my first of him, and probably the most memorable. It's a good one. Also, Drew Kreisman of Mile High Sports said Don Baylor is the most important non-player Rocky ever, or he's at least up there. A lot of their, like Bob Gebhardt's up there, Kelly McGregor, just those guys behind the scenes that made a huge impact. And I think for Don Baylor, a lot more out front. Another person, a great manager for the team, especially in their early years. Then a lot of people just they love Don Baylor. They miss him. He was just an influential one. I think, like you're saying, that first memory, he was the first Rockies manager. Technically, the first Rocky, in a sense. The first one that would be the first dugout Rocky would be Don Baylor. Interesting stuff. But he has that stint, comes back as the hitting coach, and everything goes off on his career. But I think this is the thing that was always surprising the most to me, and I think speaks a lot about to his character still, and just the way life is. In 2003, he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma disease. He battled quietly until he would pass away from it in 2017. But it was something that he just kept to himself. People didn't really know about it, and had battled it for himself for years. And Kirk Gibson, Tigers and Dodgers World Series hero, said he may be the toughest guy I was ever around. How he endured with what he had. Nobody would outloyal Don Baylor. His agent said Don had the heart of a lion and a true champion who always put others before himself, as he gave so much to so many in and out of baseball. He was the definition of a true angel. And I think this was the big one to do my research that was really cool, is he did a lot of charity work. I think that's something too that gets, throughout his 19 years, he was doing all kinds of stuff, Dustin. And another on the table, ton of charity work. And Bonnie Downing, who is a 16-year survivor of multiple myeloma, shared her own battle with Baylor after his diagnosis, finally meeting him in person in spring training. And while she was a spokesman for the disease, Baylor chose to silently fight the battle. He was so selfless, she said, that he didn't want to be a spokesman about his own illness. He wanted to instead talk about his work with cystic fibrosis. He said, I can't leave these kids. He was more concerned about them than himself. Yeah, and it just keeps going on. There's a lot of these other ones. Joe Morgan, Hall of Famer, says he was a guy who always cared more about everyone else but himself. He kept a lot of that pain inside and didn't tell anybody how he was hurting. He opened a lot of doors for African Americans in baseball, always trying to help. When he became the manager of the Rockies and had the success he did, he made it possible for others to get a managerial opportunity, and when they succeeded, he was happier for them than himself. And then lastly, one last one here from Frank Robinson, who spoke at his funeral. Says, I wasn't too friendly with too many people in baseball, and I don't say too many nice things about them, but there's nothing I can stand here and say bad about our friend Don Baylor. This is a tough time for me because I became very close with Donnie, not from when we were seeing each other every day, but in my heart. I cherished the man's friendship, and I cherished him as a person. So I think that kind of just sums up his entire career, and the life of Don Baylor is just just a good man with a good heart that was competitive, I'm sure, and fiery as all get out, but genuinely cared about other people. And what better guy to have as your manager than someone who cares deeply about you.
Yeah, and that sadly, that in on August 7th, 2017, he did pass away at age 68 after that long battle with cancer. And it's unfair, any of that, dealing with that kind of illness. But like you said, he's been doing that since 2003, that fight, and did it quietly. Probably his close circle knew what he was going through, and still he was in baseball doing all that stuff. And time, these players and baseball guys that realize there's more than baseball with seams. And he was a Roberto Clemente Award winner in
Mm-hmm.
1985, and doing those things. And you think back at this young kid, Austin, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
was able to overcome so much and do so much to give back of everything that baseball gave him the opportunity to do, and to still think about somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Just,
Yeah, and
I'm
I
just
like
gonna
that.
do.
I like that quote. He said where he didn't want to talk about he wanted to talk about his work with the cystic fibrosis and focus on those kids that were dealing with that. I can't abandon them. They need my help still. That type of that thing where it's like to heck with my problems. These people need my help too, and I'm gonna do what I can for them. And you can see that throughout his life, where he wasn't gonna let anything stop him from doing what he wanted to do and doing what he needed to do, whether it be an illness, racism, whatever it was. He wasn't gonna let it stop him. And out pitching at altitude or playing at altitude, he wasn't going to let any challenge stop him from achieving his goals or doing what he wanted to
And
accomplish.
helping push others, like you said in some of those stories, he saw something good, push somebody towards it. Dante Bichette, go talk to that girl.
Mm-hmm.
Andres Galarraga under the stadium crying. And the natural man could just grow up, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Going over and be like, let's work through this. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And guys respecting him enough to make those changes. Carlos Gonzalez talked about the impact Don Baylor had with him is when he got traded over to the Rockies, and having him as a hitting coach, as a mentor, just for the 1 year, the 2 years, made a huge impact on Carlos Gonzalez. Is again another all-time Rocky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's that mark of a true leader. And research every clubhouse he went to, even when he was younger. Like, he wasn't the oldest guy in the clubhouse, and he was the leader. He was taking charge in the clubhouse and talking to guys, guiding them, and getting the most out of whoever was around him. There's those special people in life that have been in history that have just been a focal point of just goodness that comes to others that they gravitate to, and they just show these qualities and characteristics that just make them this magnet that people want to come towards, and they receive the light from them, the guidance from them. And I think he was just one of those epitome of it, and we were lucky enough to have him in Colorado from the get go for that first decade almost, or those first few years in the 90s when they're getting their feet under them. He set the tone, and you can still even see some of that influence throughout the years when he wasn't with the team anymore. That mentality, that culture he established, you can still see hints of it throughout the years of the team trying to follow that mentality that Don Baylor established.
Yep, that's pretty much for me to wrap it up about him. Is again, there needs to be something when we're talking Rockies Hall of Fame. He's got to be in there. And
Yeah.
it's probably a little late to throw his initial or retire his 25 number. I can't think of anybody else that's worn 25.
CJ
But
Crone. Jacob Stallings now.
the original 25 for me
Yeah.
will be Don Baylor, and we're lucky to have him. And like we said, he was a perfect piece to start out the Rockies' existence, and continue to strive to looking for guys of good character like that, and
Mm-hmm.
the impact that they have not only in baseball, to those around them, and out there in the community, doing things that are bigger than themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just grateful that Don Baylor was part of that. And then when I think, again, Rockies managers, Don Baylor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the Rockies ever, which hopefully they do, because I think all those other expansion teams have one now. Diamondbacks are getting one. The Rays have one. Well, it's the Marlins, I think, are getting one or already have one. But just a team Hall of Fame, and he's in first ballot, first class. Get him in there, a plaque, whatever it needs to be, to immortalize him at Coors Field and in Rockies history. More than he already is. Maybe something a little more established, because I don't think the Rockies are successful or managed to stick around and build a fan base without Don Baylor.
Yeah, the history of the Rockies could be completely different if it wasn't him.
Yeah. If they don't have that awesome 95 season, who knows if 2007 ever comes around. No, we're just stuck in a perpetual rebuild of they never quite do anything.
We're stuck in Groundhog's Day that we've been the last few years.
Yeah. But awesome. And I think that's going to bring this episode of Every Rocky Ever to a close. Appreciate you tuning in and those that shared their thoughts about Don Baylor, and keep sharing them. Comments of this episode, wherever you find it, or when we post it on Twitter at Every Rocky Ever. You can always check that out. And continue sharing your thoughts about these players. Keep that conversation going. Rockies may not have a Hall of Fame, so we can step in and fill that void for the time being. But you can find me at Silent_crowd on Twitter. I guess Threads is a thing. Trying to do more Instagram stuff. Also for at Rocky MTN Rooftop. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Trying to do more stuff there too. And you can always follow Dustin over on Twitter at Mr. T Spanish. He doesn't do anything on there, but hey, you can follow him.
That's pretty much just my source of looking up like baseball transactions and pitching ninja videos and the Avalanche stuff. But
yeah,
it's all good.
Yeah, follow's a follow.
Yes, sir.
And also like and subscribe here on YouTube, or follow us on your favorite podcasting platform. And let us know. Hopefully, give us a 5-star review. It would be much appreciated. We'll take 4.5. 4 at the least. But that'll do it here for this one. As always, appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time here on Every Rocky Ever. I'm Skyler. That's Dustin. Farewell.
Farewell.